Hey guys, what's up? It's Samantha. I don't even want to tell you how many times I've tried to film this voiceover. I can't seem to get through it. I don't know what it is about these books. I can't seem to talk about them in a coherent fashion. So, that's where I'm at. I hope you're having a lovely day. I am going to be attempting to talk about all of the books that I read from July 6th through the 12th while I memory keep that week with this gorgeous Scribble Prince Co. mini kit and the Satin Taupe Wiggle from Scribble Prince Co. and this beautiful Simply Gilded washi. It's a beautiful spread. Nothing happened this week, so I don't have anything to talk about. It was a really boring week. And I read 6 books, and you're probably like, didn't you say in your last video that you were in a reading slump during this period of time? Well, yes, you would be correct. I was. Somehow I read 6 books this week. The next few weeks don't look like that by any stretch of the imagination. But you know, we're here now. We're going to try to talk about all 6 of these books in a condensed fashion. Every time I start talking about them, it ends up way too long. So, you know, we're just gonna jump right into it. So the first book I read was my advanced copy of Cinderella is Dead by Kalynn, Bayron, and I give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is a book that takes place about 200 years after the original Cinderella story, and Cinderella has kind of become almost a religious figure where girls are expected to live up to Cinderella's example. There are government-mandated balls that girls have to go to find their husbands, and it's a very patriarchal society. It's a little dystopian, and our main character is queer and black, and she's going to take down the patriarchy, and this is a lot of fun. It is probably a little predictable for older readers, but this is a great pick for a younger YA crowd, for tweens and very young teens. I would say like up through middle school. I think a lot of high schoolers would find this a little young and predictable, but it's very much like safe content in terms of recommending to tweens. And this reminded me a lot of kind of the twisted fairy tales or fairy tale retellings that were very popular when I was a tween, like Ella Enchanted and Just Ella. It made me very nostalgic for those, and I think if I was 11 and picking this book up, I would have absolutely adored it. Just now as an adult, for me, it was probably, like I said, a 3 or 3.5, but it's a book that I've been recommending and will continue to recommend to a younger tween crowd. And then the next book I read, I'm going to talk about it and its sequel because I read both of them this week. So the first one is The Beautiful by Renee, Ahdieh, and this was a reread for me, and I bumped up my rating from a 3.5 to a 4. This is an angsty, melodramatic YA fantasy romance that is set in the 1800s in New Orleans, and wow, I said that really weird. Okay, we're just going to roll with it. And I really love this book. On paper, this is the kind of book that I assumed I would hate, and I was so highly entertained by it. It's not necessarily historically accurate, but it's just a lot of fun. There's ambiance, there's atmosphere, there's, monsters, things that go bump in the night. There's, a mysterious man who's making, googly eyes at our main character, and there's, is he a monster or does he just associate with monsters and he's dangerous, but she wants him anyways, and they're inexplicably drawn together, and there's some weird murders going on that are very gory and bloody, and it's a lot of fun. It's paranormal, it's angsty. I've already said all of those things, but man, I just have a good time with this series. My only complaint about the first book is it felt like the monsters weren't monstery enough, and there were hints that there were vampires, but it wasn't really explicitly spelled out on page, and we didn't get a lot of detail about them, and like if everyone was a vampire or who was a vampire, if there's different kinds of vampires, it was a little like up in the air, not well fleshed out. But the second book, which I also read, The Damned, I had an advanced copy of, I also gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and this had more of everything. So more angst, more melodrama, more monsters, more points of view. So you get points of view of people who are part of the more monster, fantastical, paranormal side of things. So you get more of that world building that I felt was maybe missing a little bit from the first book. And it was really satisfying to learn more. And I really enjoyed it. I've said this before, but these books are trash and I'm a raccoon. Like, are they great literature? Probably not, but they are so much fun. And they get the trash panda seal of approval, you know? So then the next book that I read, I actually listened to, and I think this was the third or fourth time I've listened to the audiobook, and it is Agent to the Stars by John Scalzi. It's narrated by one of my faves, Will Wheaton, and this is just a really funny, short take on a first encounter story where the aliens are really repulsive and they smell bad and they look gross, and they know that if they just land on the White House lawn, humanity's gonna lose their collective minds and hate them. So they make contact just with a Hollywood agency to get an agent to represent them and try to come up with this PR plan to give them, you know, good representation on Earth and to get humans to accept them. And it's very, very funny. And it's just kind of like everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And we kind of follow the main character, Tom, who's an agent, and Joshua, who is the alien. And Tom and Joshua are trying to get to know each other. And Tom is trying to figure out how he's going to make these aliens palatable to humans because they're really gross, and the whole thing is just so funny. It's very short. I think I listened to it in an afternoon at work while I was shelving. It was just a funny, good time. And then the next book I read is probably the book that is hardest for me to talk about because I feel like I hyped it up so much in my head, and then I was disappointed. And some of the things I didn't like I ended up liking this book, but some of the things I didn't like about it some of them are just me as a reader. I'm not the target audience. And some of the things are things that I was disappointed about in the writing. So the next book I read was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which follows kind of New York City as it's being birthed into like something greater. Like there's certain cities that when they reach a certain point, they kind of become more than themselves. They are more than just a normal city, and there's avatars that represent these cities. So New York City has an avatar, and then each borough also has an avatar, and the main avatar goes missing, and all of the borough avatars have to come together to try to find him to kind of be the midwives for the birth of New York City. And then there is this villain who's the woman in white. It's kind of a Lovecraftian sort of story. So this woman in white has these white tentacles that are showing up all over the city, and she's very much she's kind of like an alien character, but she is sort of the embodiment of like white supremacy or the fear of the other, fear of immigrants, fear of people who are different than you, fear of gay people, all of that kind of stuff. And she's trying to prevent New York City from kind of being born, and they're fighting her while also trying to find the main avatar for New York City, if that makes sense. So I love the concept and I loved the end of this book, but I really struggled to connect to the characters at the beginning. And part of that could be because I'm not super familiar with New York City. And at the beginning, the avatars were functioning more like concepts than actual characters with their own internal desires, drives, character arcs sort of thing. And so I struggled to connect or care about the characters. And then about 60% of the way through the book, I feel like that shifted and they became more like individual characters that I really cared about as people and not just as concepts. And then the other thing that I struggled with, and this is something that I as a reader personally don't like, because this book was coming from N.K. Jemisin, I think I expected a lot of nuance and subtlety in the message of her book, because it's a message I definitely agree with. but I felt like I was being hit over the head towards the beginning of the book instead of just letting the message be told through the story and letting the reader, trusting that the reader is smart enough to see the conclusions that you're drawing and understand the symbolism. I kind of equate it to, not quite this bad, but in like, to the lighthouse, if every few paragraphs, Virginia Woolf said, like, the lighthouse is like a dick. Like, if she just said that out loud, like, you know, in the narrative or whatever, every few paragraphs, you're like, well, that's the symbol, but like, you don't need to spell that out for me. It's a symbol for a reason. Like, I'm supposed to figure that out. It felt like I wasn't trusted as the reader to see that nuance, and I really felt like I was being bashed over the head. It was kind of didactic, and that is something I do not like in my books. I don't like it when a message is you're just bonked over the head with it over and over and over again. I like a little more nuance and subtlety, but again, once she stopped doing that, I'd say like the back 40%, and it just was able to unfold on paper, I felt like it was much more impactful and satisfying to see that being acted out instead of just being told, like, why the woman in white is bad and, like, why her ideas are bad. And, like, yes, I agree with you, but, like, can we like, trust that I've figured this out from just watching her be a character and, like, what the message is here, you know? So that's, like, my big complaint with the book. And I've read some other reviews and other people who felt the same way. I guess I was surprised based on, like, N.K. Jemisin's other writing, just, like, the lack of nuance there. And again, it's been a few months since I read this book, but that's, like, the thing that stuck with me is I just remember feeling beat over the head by the message, the symbolism of the book. Like, I wasn't trusted to figure it out on my own. So that is how I felt. Like I said, I'd probably give, like, the first half for 60%, like, a 2-star, and then the back 40% a 5-star. My experience was markedly different between the beginning of the book and the back half of the book. Like, wildly different experience. I'll also say I switched back and forth between the physical and the audiobook. Both were good experiences, but the audiobook has awesome production value. It has really cool music and sound effects, and when the woman in white is talking, like, they do weird stuff to modulate her voice and make her sound weird, and it's really awesome production value. If you like audiobooks, check out the audiobook of this, because I really liked what they did with the audiobook there. And then the last book I read was Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender, which is a YA contemporary about a trans Black main character, and he's never been in love, and this book kind of explores Felix trying to figure out his, you know, gender identity, kind of questioning it even further, and his sexuality and finding love and all of those kind of questions that he just feels very unsettled at the beginning of the book, and watching him kind of discover new things about his identity and, you know, developing romantic relationships and all that stuff was really just sweet and satisfying to watch. Felix can be a little unlikable at times, but he's unlikable in the way a lot of 17-year-olds are unlikable, and it felt very realistic to me. The one thing that didn't feel realistic is this book had a big case of what I refer to as where are the parents, which does happen in some YA contemporary. I think this book might have worked better if it had been set in college, like still a YA book, but there's plenty of YA books that are set in college. I think this would have worked better set as freshmen in college, just certain things, like one of the characters lives in an apartment by himself. Felix just only goes home like once a week and hardly ever checks in with his dad, and just stuff that's weird for an underage kid, in my opinion. But would have made more sense if the character was in college and that kind of stuff. So, but anyways, I ended up really liking this book. I think I gave it like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The romance in it ended up being really sweet, and I was surprised with where it went, but it was a good time. It's a short, fast, really engaging read. Once I picked it up, I read it in like 2 sittings. So highly recommend Felix Ever After. So that is everything that I read this week. It was quite a lot to talk about, and especially it's been a while since I've read some of these books, so a little fuzzy on the details, but I do remember, usually the big strokes, how a book made me feel, or the things that I really loved or were irritated by. I always think that's interesting to look back this far after to be like, oh, this is what still sticks in my mind about this book. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I feel like I'm losing my voice because I've tried to do this voiceover so many times, but I'm glad that I've finally done it. I've made it all the way to the end. So, like I said, thanks for watching. If you want to always be seeing what I'm reading, make sure you're following me on Instagram and Goodreads. I post my spreads and the books I'm reading and reading updates on Goodreads all the time. So thanks for watching, guys, and I will talk to you in my next one.